Hello and welcome to Tales from the Oval. And John, this is very exciting. Our innings is proceeding at enormous pace because we're now on to episode 8. And that's very
Yeah,
appropriate, isn't it? Because we
yeah,
are going to be looking today at the greatest innings ever played at the Oval. And we've been
yeah.
following a kind of chronological sense. So in previous episodes, we were looking at the career of Percy Fender, and then we looked at the war. And one of the reasons for kind of looking at the question of the greatest innings ever played at the Oval now in our sequence is that, so in 1938, one of the most famous innings ever played at the Oval registers on the scoreboard. And shockingly, it is scored by a Yorkshireman.
Yeah, a Yorkshireman, but to be fair to Len Hutton, I think he saw the error of his geographical ways later in his life because he moved to Surrey in his later life in retirement and was very active actually in the 80s when there was a cash injection needed to the campaign was called Save the Oval, and he was a very strong supporter of that, did a lot of work in that, and has been remembered at the ground as for his contributions there. So yes, although he was a Yorkshireman, he I think did his best to sort of get some credit back later in life.
So brilliant. He moved to Surrey, God's own county. But back in 1938,
Absolutely.
I'm sure all our Yorkshire listeners will agree with that. Back in
Oh
1938,
my
I mean,
god, I'm checking my post.
he was insanely young. He was 22, and he'd made his
Yeah,
county debut in 1934. So do the maths. When he was 18, and he made his Test debut the year before,
yeah.
so 1937. And going into the Ashes series in 1938, he'd already made 4 centuries. And he had a kind of mixed bag in the 1938 Ashes series. So um, the first 3 matches of what was going to be a 5-match series had been drawn, and the third had been completely rained off. And
Disaster.
Hutton had scored 100 in the first test, and then in the second test he'd been out cheaply in both innings, and then he'd missed the third. Obviously, got rained off. The fourth he'd missed because he'd broken a finger. So all to play for coming into the fifth test, and
Yeah,
that, of course,
absolutely. Yeah, it's a huge occasion.
and that's at the Oval. It's the climax of the summer, it's the
Yes.
climax of the series, and it begins on the 20th of August, 1938, and England win the toss and they decide to bat. And when I say they bat, I mean, boy, do they bat.
Today, but my word, yeah, yet to be
There was some
surpassed in the history of
Indian,
Test cricket.
there was some Indian philosopher, wasn't there, who said that the English, having no sense of eternity, invented cricket to give them a sense of eternity. And this is
That's brilliant.
this is the innings that proves it. So by the end of the first day, England
Oh
were
my word! Yeah,
347 for 1, and Hutton was 160 not
yeah.
out, and he'd given a single chance, which was a miss stumping when he was 40. And by the end of the second day, England was 634 for 5, and Hutton was 300 not out. And
I
this was
mean, yeah,
this was already the highest home score by an Englishman because Hammond had made
yeah,
336 not out against New Zealand. But there was, I think, a feeling that
yeah,
that didn't really count because the New Zealand bowling hadn't been that good. So the innings that is
yeah,
really within that is in Hutton's targets is Bradman's 334, and that is going into the third
yeah.
day is what Hutton is after.
Well, just a note on the Bradman 334 as well is I think that it's written that Hutton, when he was 14 years old, was taken to the Leeds Test in 1930, where Bradman got that 334, and so when he was a teenager, he sat there in at Headingley and watched the innings himself. So he had a real concept not only of this batting, relentless long batting, but also of the innings that the breaths were held that he could overtake. So it
And
was a really, yeah, must have been an extraordinary thing.
do you think he vowed to himself then, "I will have vengeance for England"?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Just as a being put through that as a 14-year-old, I think that's something that's on your vengeance card for a long
Yes.
time.
Yeah. Well, so going on the third day, as Hutton approaches the milestone, to pass Bradman's score. The Australian fielding, which by this point is pretty, flat on its back, briefly reanimates itself, and they're really trying to stop him getting past it. But he gets there, square cut, whack, and there it is, and he's finally out for 364, and it is.
It's also, I think, it's incredible. I think it's also important to remember in the 3-3-4 that Bradman was obviously playing in this game, but the day before, during England's march to 634 for 5, Bradman had broken his ankle and couldn't take any further part in the game. Such was England's batting that Bradman had gone on to have an uncharacteristic bowl, and whilst doing so, had broken his ankle. So
very convenient.
So they were, the fielders were almost, defending the honour of their injured soldier as well as his iconic record.
Yeah. So so just some stats for the innings. It lasted for more than 13 hours. He faced 847 balls. It was the longest innings in first-class cricket ever played at the time. In due course, Sobers would go on to surpass it in 1958, and several other batsmen, Lara, others, have passed it since then. But it remains the highest Test score by an England batsman, and absolutely one of the iconic innings ever played at the Oval. But John, are we going to include it in our list of top 3 innings ever played at the Oval?
I think it might make the top 3. I think it might make the top. I think, but
no, it's not making the top 3.
No, it's not making the top 3.
No,
well, go on, continue.
No, and I'll tell you why it's not making the top 3. I mean, let's accept it's clearly an absolutely massive feat of concentration. No one would take that away from him. But it's a very flat wicket. The bowling attack isn't that great. And Hutton's scoring rate is incredibly pedestrian. I mean, it's not it's not the kind of innings you'd like to watch. Don't you think that a truly great innings, it has to be about more than run accumulation? It has to have a certain swagger. It has to have a certain style. I mean, it has to be entertaining to watch. And also, I think it has to be an innings that is decisive, not just in the context of the match, but in the broader context of the history of cricket. And I don't think on that.
I agree.
Based on that rubric, I don't think it qualifies. So
you're making an interesting case here. It reminds me of another Oval triple century in a Test match, which was Hashim Amla in 2012.
God,
which again, anyone who was there to
I was
similar emotions. I don't think you can deny the class and the quality, but there was not a. The only reason you were getting off your seat mostly was to go and get another drink.
Yeah,
it wasn't thrilling, was it?
So the 3 that we've chosen, we have to say to any Surrey fans listening, and I hope that lots of Surrey fans are listening, none of them are by a Surrey player, or rather, none of them are by a player who was playing for Surrey at the time it was scored. So that provides a big clue as to the innings that is at number 3, and that is the innings played at the final Ashes match in the 2005 series by, of course, Kevin Pietersen, 12th of September 2005. So I'm sure most people listening to this will remember the context. But John, do you just want to give us the context for KP's innings?
Yeah, I mean,
match.
The 2005 summer was, absolutely, obviously the summer of the modern era, and it was the last summer on free-to-air TV, so it was really sort of, blanketed the nation and was a real, country-stopping event. England were 2-1 up going into the final Test match. At least 20 years of hurt were due to be salvaged, but the country was on the edge of its seats because at 2-1, an Australian victory would have made it 2-2, and by dint of the drawn series rule would have returned the Ashes to Australia. So it was all to play for. KP hadn't had an amazing summer. He'd certainly
played quite
got
good
more
innings,
than his fair share of headlines
in the Lord's Test, the first Test.
Yeah.
But
No, he'd had
otherwise,
his moments, but
and he kept dropping everything was the other
yeah,
thing. But he needed to play
yeah,
a signature
and
innings.
yeah, he certainly did. And there was a level of controversy at the start of the series as well, just to take it from a slightly sorry perspective. In that, obviously Graham Thorpe, one of the great servants of English cricket in the 1990s and 2000s, was dropped, you know just dropped flat for KP. So there was, he was stepping into some huge shoes.
Yeah, and as you say, England need to draw the match to win the series, and it's it's a very pollulating first few days. So England scored 373, and Australia actually don't pass that. They only make 367. And what's amazing about
Yeah,
that is that at one point Australia had been 185 for no wicket, and then they've been 264 for
yeah,
one, and then a kind of an amazing collapse, really. Um, and then
yeah.
so it goes
Those
into the final
numbers take me
day,
back to a bad place.
and at lunch, it's precariously balanced because Australia are only
Oh my
133
word.
runs behind, and England only have 5 wickets
Yeah,
to get. And there'd been a particularly
yeah,
devastating spell of bowling in the morning when Glenn McGrath dismisses Michael Vaughan and Ian Bell with successive deliveries. And the man who comes in to face the hat
yeah,
trick ball is Kevin Pietersen. And it comes perilously close, doesn't it? I mean, it kind of barely misses
yeah,
his glove, and it kind of cannons off his
yeah.
shoulder. So there is
But that was the
drama at this
moment,
innings
wasn't it?
from the beginning,
Yeah.
from the absolute
That was
beginning.
the moment, wasn't it? When all of us who'd watched Ashes cricket throughout the 90s and the early
Yeah,
2000s,
we just thought,
and we all just sat there, not dissimilar. We're recording this podcast a couple of days after England have lost to Spain in the finals of the Euros, and we were just sitting there. Oh, he's done it. Okay,
here we
okay,
go.
Vaughan's out, and then
Yeah,
Bell gets out the next ball. It's like, right, this is it. This is the moment. This is the moment, guys. We've been waiting for it, and off we, and we. I was certain. I was absolutely certain. Such was the emotional burden that I was watching this match under. I was absolutely certain that was it, and we were done. And then
yeah,
that you say that hat trick ball just almost killed me.
and there are two more heart-stopping moments because Warren is bowling
Yeah.
and KP still to get off the mark, and he's dropped. And then amazingly, he's reached 15, and Warren himself, who's normally the safest pair of hands, drops him off
Yeah.
Brett Lee, who is bowling like a kind of fiery tornado at this point.
Oh, it's
So
extraordinary. People sometimes say about oval test matches because they're the final test of the summer, um, especially if there are no white ball games afterwards, which there weren't in this instance. Then the tourists have got nothing to save themselves for. They don't need to worry about, oh, I've got 3 more tests to play this summer, etc. So they can just leave absolutely everything out there, and that was entirely what Brett Lee was doing on that day. Like he was bowling with complete abandon for his sort of short term physical future.
but Pietersen is also batting with great abandon. So despite the fact that
Yeah,
he's slightly being worked over, he is also taking the fight to the Australians, and it's clear that he's not blocking, which is by every rubric what they should be doing. They should be kind of playing for the draw, but he's going on the attack, and lunch comes, and Vaughan says to Peterson, "Yeah, go out and play your natural game." And KP completely takes him at his word because
yeah, yeah,
the innings that he plays after lunch is just astonishing, and you still have Lee pounding in,
yeah,
bouncing him, and Peterson just hooks and hooks and hooks him, and the ball goes further and further
yeah,
into the crowd. And then there's that kind of amazing
yeah,
baseball shot he plays. And Boycott, I always remember
yeah,
Boycott
hitting
going,
him
ho, ho,
straight.
ho, ho. Just this, and it's the most extraordinary innings, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it's just completely incredible. And we talked 2 minutes ago, about the emotional burden that some of us was watching the game under, and actually, we'd never seen an English batter, Test batter, play like this before in such a crucial pressurized moment. We expected it to be the as you say, the classic, block this, take time out the game, just probably play and miss 87 times and get a couple of lucky LBW decisions, whatever. But yeah, it was from a sort of psychological perspective and almost a sort of sociological perspective. The way that KP played that innings was so
Yeah.
shocking. It almost sort of there was that the emotional release of the shots that he was playing and the way that he was playing was just incredible. It was you could almost argue as it was as a moment it was bigger what he was doing. I don't think he was certainly aware of it at the time, but what he was doing was bigger to the psyche of the English
Yeah,
cricket fan than
completely.
than
And I think that,
purely playing how he was.
and I think that's why why it merits its the position that it does in this ranking. So just
Yeah,
the stats: he's out for 158, and he hits 15 fours, 7 sixes. Um, but those stats don't really convey the significance of the innings because, of course, I mean, it ends up securing England the draw. Um, e- e-
yeah,
England have regained the Ashes, so that's massive. But it's also, as you say, it's the last innings that is played on free to air TV of Test series, and it kind of sums up for people what cricket can be. I mean, it's the kind of
mm,
cricket
mm,
that that if you're a a child as a fan, you kind of fantasize yourself playing. I mean, but it would seem impossible that such an innings could be played, but it is, and I think
mm.
it's it defines English cricket as a kind of memory as it fades from TV. Would you say?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's a really beautiful way of putting it. But it's that I suppose that other reasons to think why this should be in here as well. You talked about the Hutton innings potentially not being against some of the greatest opposition in
Yeah,
terms of bowling. I mean, obviously Bradman was in that game, but the bowling. But Pietersen played this innings against Brett Lee, as we've said, bowling consistently as fast as he'd ever bowled. Glenn McGrath, who on the morning of the fifth day had got back-to-back wickets and almost got KP with the hat-trick. Shane Warne at the absolute peak of his powers, and Jason Gillespie, who in any fair world would have led a Test match attack for 10 years, but was extraordinarily somehow a fourth bowler for this Australian team. It was just and under the fielding positions and the motivation on the field has been provided by Ricky Ponting. It was he was playing against a team of lions. There is
yeah.
no doubt about that. And yeah, he dominated.
So he's at number three, and I think he's at number three just for a couple of reasons. The first is that he is dropped actually 3 times, so I think he's dropped on 60 as well.
Yeah,
There's a kind of a despairing lunge um, off one of his hooks, but there's also the
yeah,
fact that I think that when you're ranking innings, I mean, we talked about this before. You have to bear in mind that innings that are on television and that are within living memory are always going to live more brightly in the minds of people who are doing things, what we're doing, kind of drawing up a list, than those in the pre-television era, and particularly in periods that no one alive ever remains who ever saw these innings. So that the next 2 innings are both pre-television period, and there is no one alive who saw them, but they continue to reverberate. Their fame endures, and I think that is a certain measure of
yeah.
of quality and status. So at number 2, we have an innings that was also played the last Test match of an Ashes series, and this was in 1902. And 1902
Yeah.
ranks alongside 1981 and 2005, I would say, in the gallery of great Ashes series played in England. And this is a match that is known
Hmm.
as Jessup's match. And after Gilbert Jessup, the Gloucestershire batsman, famously known as the Croucher, and he scored 104,
Yes, great.
against Australia. And to say he scored 104 doesn't really do justice to the impact of that innings. So,
No,
CB Fry said
no,
of this innings,
no.
interestingly, that if ever an innings ought to have been filmed, that was the one. And I think that is clearly true
Yeah,
because it continued. It was really interesting when Bazball started, and Bairstow in particular kept going berserk, and he'd have a chance of reaching his century in 76 balls, and this was a stat that haunted people watching it. And the reason for that
yeah,
is that Jessup took 76 balls, or maybe on some accounts 74, to reach his century, and it remains the fastest ever Test
mm,
century by an England batsman. And Bairstow, I think, on
mm,
one occasion against New Zealand, missed it by one ball. But that sense that
yeah.
Jessup's innings remains a massive landmark in the era of Bazball, I think, absolutely confirms its status as, well, the second greatest innings played at the Oval. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think it's an extraordinary innings. It had been forgotten for not forgotten, but it hadn't been mentioned really, in popular cricketing culture for a long time. Simply because the idea of it ever being overtaken seemed so outrageous, I think. And then, when Key came in and Bazball and everything else and Stokes and McCullum and all of that, then suddenly the way that England began to play again took this took this possibility, statistically at least, back into the realms of the
Yeah,
achievable. And
yeah,
ever since then, I think it would almost, some certain commentators would see it as a sort of not necessarily a crowning moment of Bazball, but a very an important and a big moment within the Bazball project, if that's what you want to call it. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but within the era of Bazball for this innings to be overcome. And I suspect it's coming. And yeah, it's an
but
amazing
John,
achievement.
even if it is overtaken, um, I think there are two reasons why it will remain completely iconic, and also why I think it ranks above KP's innings. And the first is that the conditions are unplayable. It's This is not an era of covered
Yeah,
wickets, and on 2 days, both
yeah,
when England are batting, there is torrential downpour over the Oval, and England have to bat on kind of drying conditions, and they are
yeah,
essentially unplayable. So that's amazing. And the other
yeah,
is that
yeah.
this is one of the most exciting Test matches ever played. The
Mm,
climax is much more exciting than the climax of the Oval in 2005. So Jessup
hmm.
sets up what is one of the most thrilling moments in the whole of sport. And I think there was a survey
Yeah,
that was held by the Evening Standard, maybe in the 30s, and it was saying, if you could have a time machine, what sporting event would you want to go and see? And even then, people were saying, I would want to go and see Jessup's match. So that's a sense of how,
yeah,
even a few decades after it's still lived in the memory. And I think there are kind of, I'm not saying people talking about it in the stands at the Oval today, but probably, if you know something about cricket, you will have a sense of it as one of the great
mm,
matches. So, shall we have a look at how Jessup comes to play
yeah,
this innings and the broader context of the series? So,
yeah,
the
yeah,
the the contrast with 2005 is that Australia go to the Oval 2-0 up, and it's the last in the series, so they have won the Ashes. There's no contest about that. They are a brilliant team. They've got Victor Trumper, who, of course, one of the all-time great batsmen. That iconic photo of him means that he still very much lives
yeah,
in the memory. But England have pushed
yeah.
Australia hard, and I think there's a feeling that they kind of deserve a victory. That certainly, 2-0 or 3-0 would be an unfair reflection of how close the series had been.
Mm.
So Jessup is selected. There's a very imperious letter written by our old friend Lord Hawko, the
Here he
Hawkster.
is, Hawkeye, the Hawkster.
And the
Yeah, yeah,
Hawkster
Hawkmaster
is
General. Yeah,
he's telling Jessup, we want you to bowl as well as bat. And this is a problem for Jessup because he's
yeah,
he's injured himself, so he can't really bowl. But anyway, that's sorted out, and he
yeah.
ends up playing basically as a batsman, which is just as well. And so
Uh,
the Test match starts, and it's perishingly cold. It's the middle of
yeah,
August, but it's unseasonably cold. So everyone they have their
yeah,
mufflers and their hats and their kind of overcoats, and it's a huge crowd. They've all come to see Trumper, but also to see if England can pull one back. And it doesn't look like England are going to pull one back because Australia, they bat well. They score 324. And then, as I said, overnight, there's heavy rain, which means that, drying conditions, it's pretty much unplayable. And England are in immediate trouble. They're 83 for 5, and they end up somehow clawing their way to 183. So they've saved the follow-on by 9 runs. And Jessup has only made 13. He's been a bit scratchy. So it's really not looking good. Australia go into bat again.
No.
And Jessup makes his first real impact in the match by running out Trumper for 2. And Jessup is a brilliant fielder, and dismissing Trumper, it's one of the key turning points in the match. And the thing I love about Jessup, which is so unlike, I think, any sportsman writing at the moment. So he wrote a book, A Cricketer's Log, and he's describing this match. And John, the way he describes it is Trumper was run out attempting a risky run, but he doesn't say who ran him out. He doesn't say the eyes ran him out.
I did that. Yeah,
that is so not what I would do.
It's incredible.
I would the
just understatement
all the time. So that's
the understatement of the era is a wonderful thing. Yeah,
I think it reflects very well on his modesty. So Australia end the day on 114 for 8, and then again the rain comes sweeping in, and some of the kind of the books by cricketers who played in it, England cricketers, they describe how they're in the hotel and they hear the hammering of the rain against the window panes and going, oh no, this is going to be an absolute nightmare. So they go back to the Oval, and
nails being hammered into their coffin.
Absolutely. So Australia, they lose their last 2 wickets for 7 runs, and it's apparent from that this is not going to be fun at all. So England go out to bat, and they lose 5 wickets for just under 50 there, 48 for 5. And they've got 263 to win, and Jessup is in.
That's a lot.
And McLaren, the great batsman, calls out to him as he's going out, I bet you don't make a century. And Jessup looks back and says, done, you're on. And he goes out, and John, is it mayhem?
It's carnage. It's
mayhem and carnage.
It's mayhem and carnage simultaneously. I mean, it's I suppose again, you describe the situation so well. There is almost no point in him doing anything other than throwing caution to the wind. The conditions are such that there's almost no point in trying to sit there and block, because of ultimately very shortly you're probably going to get one that goes under your bat or whacks you on the toe or hits you in the glove and gets caught or whatever. So you may as well just go out and bat how he bats, because who knows what might happen. On this occasion, Tom, as you're about to describe, it comes off in incredible ways.
Yeah. So just some commendation. So CB Fry again. I should say Jessup's 104 must rank as the greatest innings by a pure hitter ever played. And Wisden, all things considered, a more astonishing display has never been seen. But to characterize it just as big hitting, I think doesn't really do justice to the incredible strength of character that Jessup showed, because I think it must rank as probably the greatest innings ever played against the run of play, because the context is so hopeless. I mean, even more than Botham's 149 at Headingley in 81. It is just...
Or Stokes at Headingley.
It's an amazing, amazing innings, and it opens up for people a sense of what can be done with, with big hitting. And so it's unsurprising that there's a story that PG Woodhouse, he sees the session before lunch, and then he has to go to his bank, so he misses the rest of Jessup's innings, and it's this supposedly that encourages him to chuck in his bank job and take up writing full time. So Jessup's innings has a huge influence on the
Yeah,
history of English literature,
come
and the
on.
whole of basically
I
the
mean,
the Oval has never been more packed
wow.
out. It's full of people, and it's still cold. They're all wearing their mufflers and their hats, and they're tossing their hats in the air.
Yeah,
Hooray, hooray! As the shots
yeah,
just rain down. And of course, they're not scoring sixes, are they? I mean, he's because it's he had
yeah.
a six. You have to hit it out of the ground at this point.
Out to the ground, yeah. And this, I think, is also the era of I think it's fair to say fuzzy crowd capacities. So obviously there's famous, yeah. This is 20 odd years before the White Horse FA Cup final, but certainly I don't really think in 1902. I mean, I think they had a vague idea about how many seats they had in the ground in 1902, but I don't think that necessarily conflated with the number of people they then allowed into the ground
Yeah,
on moments like this. I think it's there's the crowd of people watching the watching the game is only really sort of quelled by when you can finally reach a point where no one can actually see any of the grass. I think it's one of those just sort of unimaginably large crowd of people trying to get a glimpse.
yeah, yeah. Watching one of the greatest innings ever played. So he scores 175 minutes. After he's reached his 100, he hits another boundary, and then he's out. So for 104, and everyone in the crowd is saying,
Yeah.
"Woof, what have we seen?" But so also, I think, are the Australian bowlers. I think they're left completely shell shocked and demoralised, and that matters because
Mm,
England are still a long way from victory. So when Jessup's out, they're 187 for 7, and they've got they need
yep.
76 to win. Conditions are easing by this point, but it's still a massive ask, and it's no one comes and bats as Jessup has done. It's much more steady accumulation, which of course makes it all the more agonizing for people watching.
Yeah.
And famously, it
Yeah.
ends up with England needing
They-
15 to win. And the number 11
Mm,
batsman is someone we've already mentioned in this series as an opening batsman, as Hobbs's partner, and that's Wilfred Rhodes, the great Yorkshire
mm.
bowler and all-rounder, who I think is the only England player ever to have been promoted from 11 and ends up opening the innings. But at this point,
Yeah.
he's a tail ender, and he goes out to join his fellow Yorkshireman George Hurst at the wicket. And Hurst's famous instruction is get them in singles. Whether he actually
Yeah.
said this is disputed, but always go with the
Yeah, it's
myth
another
if in doubt.
one of the great Yorkshire contributions to the English cricket vernacular. That
Yeah,
it's I think there's a certain type of Yorkshire fan that's still it's that kind of boycott epitomised kind of Yorkshire attitude. Get them in singles. It really has gone. I'm sure people have got that tattooed on them, and it's on gravestones in North Yorkshire somewhere.
and of course this is another reason why Jessup's innings lives in the memory so much, is that on the same day you have that explosive match-turning hitting, and then you have the absolute
Yeah,
illustration of how unbelievably tense cricket can be when almost no runs are
yeah,
being scored at all. And this is another of those
yeah.
matches where people supposedly gnaw their way through the handles of their umbrellas and have heart attacks. And there's a famous moment when the scores draw level, and that one of the spectators thinks that England have won and leaps up and starts running onto the wicket, kind of
Yeah,
dancing, full of joy.
bombs
Turns out
on.
to be a vicar, brought disgrace on the cloth. So, so, um, so after this shameful display
It's
from the
incredible.
vicar,
Yeah.
um, Rhodes
He's
plays the
carted
next ball,
off. Yeah.
nothing. Next ball,
Mm.
nothing. Next ball, nothing. And then he hits the ball, pushes it past mid-on, runs down the wicket, doesn't stop, keeps running into the pavilion, and the Oval and all of London explodes in joy. And that is the end of one of the greatest Test matches ever played. And
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
England win thanks to an innings that, as we've said, still to this day lives in the memory. So
Well, amazing from Rhodes to carry on running straight into the pavilion. Firstly, it's lovely because you can tell which end of the ground he scored the runs from. So
Yeah,
as I'm looking down at it now, I can see that, and that's great. But secondly, you got to feel for poor George Hurst stuck at the other end, who
he gets
I'd
caught up,
maybe
doesn't
wasn't
he?
quite as swift between the wickets as Rhodes. He gets caught up and entirely subsumed
Yeah,
by the crowd. And in the report, it's read that he was caught and carried away.
yeah,
So quite
yeah.
by whom and to where has not
Well,
been
hopefully the
specified.
vicar,
But I don't think
posse
he
of
gets back in the
vicars.
dressing room quite as quickly as he
Yeah,
will. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just carried straight to St Mark's to thank him for his service. I mean,
yeah.
the amazing image of just him being carried away in the moment of triumph.
So, so that's number two. So we've had two obviously very famous, very iconic innings that
Yeah.
everyone interested in cricket will probably have heard of. The
Mm.
the innings we have at number one, I think
Mm.
lots of people may not have heard of it. So people may be wondering,
Mm.
why on earth have we chosen an
Yeah, I
innings
think
that
it's
lots of
possible.
people may not have heard of? I mean, how can this be the greatest? And the answer is that we've said that a great innings has to reverberate beyond the context of the match, that it has to echo through eternity, like Gladiator.
Mm.
Um, and this innings, which was played in 1866 on the 30th and 31st of July, has lots of claims to be perhaps the most significant, the most decisive innings ever played, not just at the Oval, but in the history of cricket. And it was played
Hmm.
by W.G. Grace for England, in inverted commas, against Surrey.
Yeah.
And I remember reading about this innings in Richard Tomlinson's biography of Grace, Amazing Grace, the Man Who Was W.G., which came out in 2015 for the centenary of his death. And it's amazingly early in Grace's career. So it's his first century, and he scored it when he was only 18. And
Mm.
it's Grace's attempt to solve his first run of bad form. So Grace is an amazing sportsman, amazing batsman, but he has a slight slump, and he tries to work out a way to solve this slump. And his solution changes the face of cricket in a way that I hadn't properly understood the significance of it until 2 years later. Night Watchman, the kind of the grantor of cricket writing, brilliant quarterly selection of brilliant cricket writing. And there was an anniversary edition for the Oval came out, so a series of essays and articles themed
Yeah.
around the Oval.
Yeah.
And they had an essay
Came
by
out on the
Jon
occasion of
Hutton.
the 100th test.
That's right. And they had an essay by Jon Hutton, who I think is the best English cricket writer writing at the moment. Superb
He's brilliant.
writer. And he wrote this about Grace's innings. If I could watch one innings from all of cricket history, I would choose to watch Grace's 224 not out for All England against Surrey at the Oval in 1866. Grace was 18 years old and about to reshape the game in his image. It was the first of his 126 centuries. The ground was not old then, but a symbol of modernity. And here was the true shock of the new, an innings and a player more significant than any before or since. The last decade has seen nothing short of a revolution in batting, but even this advance was shaped by that innings, played when overarm bowling was new and wickets were minefields, and the whole concept of batsmanship was simply to survive. It was this mindset that Grace was, in his words, determined to test, and over 2 days in Kennington, he introduced a philosophical shift that would change cricket forever and usher in its modern form. So people may be wondering, well, what exactly was this revolution? And the solution, Grace's solution to his slump in form is, in his words, to hit deliveries hard and high over the top of close set fielders into the open spaces that are, between the fielders and the boundary. And if the bowler responds to this by dropping short, then he will hook or cut the bowler. And this is a tactic that seems so obvious today that you can't imagine that someone had to
Yeah.
invent it. But WG does at the age of 18
WG
in this
does.
innings.
Yeah.
And it's all about placement.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
because Grace relies on his ability to hit over a fielder and to make it land at a place where obviously he won't be caught. And even well into his career, there are still people who don't properly get that. So Tomlinson, in his book, he has this anecdote where Grace had been batting for Gloucestershire. He'd made more than half Gloucestershire's innings, and an old friend says to Grace, "Not one of your best knocks, Doctor. The ball was in the air too much." And the guy describing this says, everyone sat there waiting for the explosion, but Grace only says, "Why didn't they catch it then?" And that's the thing, because he knows they're not going to catch it, because he knows where to hit it. And that, of course, in the era of T20, that's completely taken for granted. But it's amazing to think that Grace invents that. And he has to invent it because what he's doing is incredibly offensive to the presumptions of batsmanship as they operated in before that innings. And I think that only a very, very young batsman could possibly have had the chutzpah to kind of reinvent batting in that way, to go against the conventions, the expectations, the standards. An incredible display of audacity that changes the face of cricket. Now, there's one of the reasons I think why it doesn't live in the memory is that it's not televised. Obviously, it's not even really recorded by newspapers in the way that Jessup's match was. So Grace didn't keep a diary, but there is one match report which is by a cricket writer called James Pycroft, who watched it and gave this description. So this is Grace. He played every ball, whether to the off or to the on, with the exception of one which bumped. This feat seems to me one of the most remarkable of his achievements, and it was rendered the more difficult because Ben Griffith, who was a fast bowler, was bowling in a very wild manner. So over the course of that innings, he left one ball. So Ben Duckett, eat your heart out.
Yeah. Go on, Ben.
And we talked about how Hurst, after when in Jessup's match, couldn't get back to the pavilion. Pycroft records how at the end of Grace's innings, and Grace is not out, he ran from the wicket to the pavilion, but experienced great difficulty in reaching his destination as his friends and admirers mustered in great force and manifested their enthusiasm in the correct Surrey manner. John,
what's the
correct Surrey manner?
I hope boisterous and respectful.
I hope that hats were tossed in the air. I like to think that's the correct Surrey
I hope
manner.
hats were tossed in the air. Yeah, I hope umbrellas or sticks were waved, and hopefully maybe at some stage jackets and ties removed, even in 1866.
I hope so. So what's even more brilliant?
And it was all off to the Oval Tavern for a pint of South London's finest.
What is even more brilliant about Grace's innings and about Grace is that he's made this amazing innings. All England are clearly going to win. And Grace goes to his captain and says, "Look, I'd quite like to go to Crystal Palace Park," because there is there's an All England athletics contest there, and Grace is a great hurdler. So they say, "Yeah, fine, cool, yeah, whatever, go off you go." So he misses the last day's play,
right.
And he puts on his famous salmon pink running knickerbockers, and he wins his event, quarter-mile hurdle race.
He wins it.
Yeah. So and what makes it even better
people
is
there as well.
Surrey, All England beats Surrey by an innings and 296 runs. So, I mean, what an amazing achievement. So, just to finish this by quoting Jon Hutton again.
Yeah.
He in Night Watchman, he wrote, "Imagine being able to watch that happen. It's possible to leap across centuries to Kevin Pietersen's innings of 2005 and know that its kindred fed by the same earth. It had the same spirit to challenge the bowlers, to challenge the game itself. 4 weeks after he made that 224, WG returned to the Oval and scored 173 for the Gentlemen of the South against the Players, an innings said to have been even better, and one in which he hit so fiercely he broke his bat." So I love that sense of there being a sense of continuity between two of the three innings we've described, and I'm sure John would agree that Jessup's innings stood in that tradition as well. And I do think it's interesting how over the course of this series, without really intending to, how important Grace has been to this story. That he's not a Surrey player, he's a Gloucestershire player, and yet he keeps kind of appearing, and that sense of Grace as the iconic figure who essentially makes modern cricket, I think, does still kind of linger in the imaginings.
Yeah, I think it does. And we talked earlier in the series about this my theory that you can tell the history of cricket purely by referring to events and matches and innings that have taken place at the Oval. And I think this you're right that the fact that Grace keeps reappearing, I think underscores that theory, because it's easier to do to tell that to make that theory in the modern age, because as you say, everything is so much better recorded and filmed and everything else. But when you look back in some of the detail that you have and we have in this series, you can see that Grace clearly was the man that ultimately evolved the sport to become what it did in the early part of the 20th century, and to allow Jessup to do what he did, and you
Yeah,
can see as we look at it the sport evolving, and Grace was absolutely vital to all of that. A couple of things I just reflecting on that innings as well. We talked about how he was 18, and the sort of the chutzpah that an 18-year-old would have had to show to bat how he did. There's obviously many great stories in cricket about Grace's sort of famous arrogance, as you say in that story. The we all sat tight expecting an explosion. There's plenty of occasions where Grace doesn't come off as a particularly sympathetic character, but I think it shows that arrogance that he had was there from an early age, and actually probably necessary for him to be who he was. And the other thing, purely going back to what we've talked about in terms of our love of Hirsute's cricketers,
mm,
was again an 18-year-old Grace. I imagine most people have been listening to us tell this story, and they've been seeing the picture of Grace that exists. The Coleman's
yeah.
mustard picture of Grace that exists in all cricket fans' minds. He was 18 at this stage, so I'm pretty sure he did this clean shaven.
Yes, I think he has side whiskers, kind of quite hairy side whiskers, and he's very
Side whis-
slim. I
side
mean, he's
whiskers.
yeah.
Yeah,
So the
yeah.
beard is waiting to grow and the belly is waiting to expand. So that
Waiting
will
to come
come.
out. But this
Yeah,
is
all
that'll
to
come.
come.
But there's one last thing I just wanted to pick up on in Jon's final piece in that you read, where he said it's possible to leap across centuries to Kevin Pietersen's innings of 2005 and know that it's kindred. This is the bit I love, where it says fed by the same earth. And I think that's a lot of what we've been talking about here for the last few episodes. You think about everything that we've talked about here. We've talked about the market garden. We've talked about the otters. We've talked about Grace. We've talked about the Victorians. We've talked about the 1930s. We've talked about the 1950s. We're going to go on in later episodes where we talked about Kevin Pietersen in 2005, and we've still got a few more episodes to come and more cricket to talk about. But yeah, this concept
Yeah.
I think is almost this linking thing that we're talking about. That phrase that Jon used there. It's wonderful. Fed by the same earth.
Oh,
I
Jon,
think
it's
that's
a
that's
lump in
that's
your throat.
something.
Yeah, so we have we have 3 more episodes to go, and Surrey fans may feel that this has been a bit Surrey light, um, but fear not.
Well,
In our next episodes, we will be looking at the decade where basically Surrey just won everything. So we will be nominating
yeah.
our selection of the greatest ever Surrey team. So hopefully we'll see you then. Bye bye.
Thank you.